Welcome to I Dream of Words, where playing with language is constant and writing is the meaning of life. If English is your native language, you likely have a pretty clear idea in your mind what the difference between art and craft is. If you come from another culture with a different assumed language, you likely have a similarly solid idea, but it's not necessarily the same thing. If I ask you what's art, you may immediately think of paintings, drawings, or sculpture. In an English-speaking culture, actually most Western cultures for that matter, that is the norm. Asking a question like, is music art? Or is a photograph art? Is common, but answers will vary. Usually things like writing, architecture, design, and building furniture are dismissed as not art. Why is this so important? In Western culture, there is a sharp division between art and craft, and that break is judgmental. Art is seen as something highly respectable, valuable, and worth creating. Craft is often looked at as the lowest possible thing. This is loosely related to the notion of talent, something that is altogether cultural and fictitious, but incredibly strong in Western culture. It is assumed that anyone can learn a craft, say how to build a table, weave a basket, take a photograph, or paint the side of a house. Not at all an incorrect assumption. Anyone can, with practice, master these skills. The problem is that when something is seen as an art, painting or sculpture for example, or even music, it is assumed that there is a supernatural entity that has filled the person with a special ability. That's arcane myth, however. We now know quite clearly, and if you've ever met an artist, it should be pretty obvious, that what is demonstrated as talent has taken them hours, usually thousands, tens of thousands, even hundreds of thousands, to perfect and master. Does it take any more or less effort, skill, or studying to carve a bowl, or weave a scarf, compared to painting a portrait or writing a sonata? But there is a fairly simple difference, at least at the language level, between art and craft. And as we're talking about language, that's a good place to begin. Art is something created to be beautiful. Not necessarily successfully so, but that's the intent. While craft is something created to be useful as an object. That's not to say that a painting can't be useful, or a table can't be beautiful, but it's about intent. The purpose of a craft is to create a useful product, while art makes beauty that doesn't have to be useful in the typical sense of the word. Of course, we have all seen decidedly ugly paintings, sculptures that almost cause physical pain to behold, stunningly beautiful chairs, and fabric that stimulates our imagination. Can a table be art? Certainly. Can a sketch be a useful craft object? Definitely. There's nothing that says there's not crossover, but that's where the line is, whatever you may want to think about walking over it. Sadly, many people tend to think of high art as being more prestigious than creation with a purpose other than beauty, and that often leads people to see themselves on one side or the other, especially when describing what they do with their lives. But where do you make art or create crafts? Usually this location is, if not a classroom, a studio or a shop. Of course, some artists like to say, I'm in the shop today, meaning the place they paint. And some craftspeople will call the place they keep their saws and chisels a studio. And what you call your workspace is, as with everything else in language, completely up to you. But it might be good to know a little of the backstory, so you're at least making an informed decision, and see where other people's choice of words is coming from too. Studio comes from the same place as study, in the sense of music or art. It's a word that implies repetition in the pursuit of beauty, which is certainly not a bad thing. In a studio, you're developing mastery of a skill that is meant to be beautiful in some way. Playing studies and scales on the piano, or painting hand after hand after hand to make sure your new painting is as lifelike as possible. Shop, however, comes from an ancient word meaning a place where trade is created, as in, you're not necessarily making something beautiful, but you're making something valuable. So whether you want to paint or build, weave or sculpt, play notes or carve spoons, making something useful, beautiful, or both is perhaps the most fundamental desire of modern humans. Hopefully now it's just a little easier to talk about it. That's all for this time. Thanks for listening.